As you might have seen already, I have recommended some helpful resources written into your course companion of places that you can seek out information to aid your decision making. But before you dive into it, I just want to talk to you a little bit about risk and research and how to understand it. You might think that you've already been labelled as high risk or low risk, and actually, the word risk isn't that helpful to us during pregnancy. I prefer the word chance because the word risk makes it sound like birth is something that is inherently risky, and actually, birth is a completely normal physiological thing that happens in our lives that is very, very safe the vast majority of the time, even for those who have been labelled high risk. What's more important is the way that these chances are presented to us. Now, there's two ways of presenting risk, something called relative risk and something called absolute risk. I'm going to give you a non-birth related example that will hopefully explain what these look like and which things we want to be paying attention to when it comes to giving birth. So imagine for a moment you were driving a car, and I told you that if you drive a black car, you're twice as likely to be involved in a car accident than somebody who drives a white car. Now, when we hear this, it sounds quite risky, quite dangerous. Twice as likely sounds like that black car's going to crash. This information is not helpful to us at all, and this is what we call relative risk. What we want to know is the actual statistics. So if I was to say to you, 2 in 1,000 drivers of black cars become involved in an accident per year, 1 in 1,000 drivers of white cars become involved in an accident per year. This is what we call absolute risk. It's the actual numbers, the actual statistics. And while the relationship is correct, it does double. It's only going up by 0.1%. That is why people still drive black cars. If you want to delve even further into it, what we want to know is, well, what were the conditions of the road? How long had these drivers been driving cars? Was it a scratch to the bumper or a total write-off? This is the kind of information that you'll get from delving a little bit deeper into research. An absolute risk is the way that we want information about birth presented to us. If you're being offered an induction or a cesarean, what you want to know is what the absolute risk of not doing those things, not the relative risk. Ideally, this would then be followed up with a conversation about how relevant this research is to your situation, because maybe you don't drive a black car or a white car, maybe you drive a grey car. Now, please note that I made up those numbers about driving cars, so don't go out basing your car purchasing decisions on these statistics. It's just an example to show you how it works and how, therefore, it might be applicable to birth research. So next time you're faced with a decision, make sure you ask for the actual numbers. Go away, think about how it applies to you. And the important thing to point out is that we will all interpret risk and statistics very differently. To some people, a 0.1% increase would be enough reason to buy a white car. And for other people, they might have reasons for wanting a black car. The other thing we want to be sure of is that when we're being told about risks, the comparison that is being made is between two things that we actually have control over. So frequently, I will support families who will be told things like, because you had a severe tear in your first birth, you are now 3 times as likely to have one in your second birth, with a recommendation about place of birth or recommending a cesarean birth or something. Now, see if you can work out the question that you would want to be asking here. What we want to know is 3 times more likely than who? The chance of having a severe tear in your second birth, if you didn't have one in your first birth, is about 2%. The chance of having one in your second birth, if you did have one in your first birth, is about 7%. So you are indeed about 3.5 times more likely to experience one than somebody who didn't have one first time. The chance of you having a severe tear in your first birth is about 6%. Now, you cannot currently, despite modern science, reverse time and not have had a tear in your first birth. It's already happened. So comparing a group of women who did tear with a group who didn't is completely irrelevant when it comes to making a decision, because no choice that you ever go on to make will put you in the other group. The same goes for when we are comparing people based on age or previous cesarean or any risk factor that you cannot change. If you can't change the risk factor, then we want the comparison to be based on things we can control. So home birth versus hospital for women planning a VBAC, that's useful. Home birth VBAC versus home birth for a second vaginal birth is completely useless. And this is why we need to start thinking critically about the information that is often presented to us as read, because actually it requires a much more nuanced exploration around what it means for us as an individual. You don't have to do all of that unpicking by yourself. This is just to get you thinking about potentially having more curious conversations with your care team, or with me if we work together one-to-one, or doing a little bit more digging by yourself.